The idea came wrapped in smiles. Mariana had that way of tilting her head when she wanted something, that innocent tilt she used as a girl when asking for another slice of cake, or when she'd broken something and didn't want to be scolded. She did the same thing that afternoon at my apartment, holding a folder with travel brochures printed in color, her husband Enrique standing just behind her, with a hand on her shoulder, like a silent stamp of approval. "We thought it would be nice," she said, "to spend this Christmas together. You know, like when I was little, but somewhere special, somewhere grand." Her eyes were shining. There was peppermint tea steeping on my counter. The heater hummed in the corner. I was still wearing my old sweater, the one with the sleeves worn thin, and the idea of going abroad, to Europe, no less, struck me as both absurd and oddly sweet. "We've been looking at Paris," Enrique added. "The hotel's right by the Seine. There's a Christmas market, horse-drawn carriages. It would be unforgettable." I looked at them both and then at the brochures. The Eiffel Tower lit up against the winter sky. A family holding hands in front of a lavish Christmas dinner. Snow falling gently behind luxury glass windows. I hadn't been on a plane in over 20 years. I hadn't celebrated Christmas with anyone since Mariana stopped calling on the 24th. "But why now?" I asked, careful not to sound suspicious. Mariana squeezed my hand. "Because it might be the last time we're all together like this, Dad. Before the boys grow up, before life pulls us apart again." She spoke like a woman who knew how to touch the soft places of a father's heart. And maybe she did. Maybe she remembered just how much I ached to feel like a part of something again. Like family. "We'll handle the logistics," Enrique continued. "Just a few things we'd need to coordinate. The flights, hotel, travel insurance. Nothing major. But it would help if the payment came from one account. Easier to manage." There it was. The offer. The hand extended. Not in affection, but in function. They weren't asking me to join them. They were asking me to fund it. Still, I said I'd think about it. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. I just nodded and looked out the window, where the wind pushed December's first leaves down the quiet street. That night, I sat with my old ledger, the one where I still kept my finances in neat blue ink. It had been years since I touched the pension I inherited from my father, and I'd been careful with my savings. I had enough. Our $500,000. It was just sitting there, enough for comfort, for quiet, for peace. But maybe, just maybe, enough for one last moment with my daughter before time took it all away. The next day, I called her. I said yes. Her voice jumped on the line. "You won't regret it, Dad. I promise. It's going to be magical. I'll handle everything, okay? You just relax." She sounded 16 again. For a moment, I let myself believe in that voice. The planning was quick, efficient. She asked for a copy of my ID, bank details, and permission to issue a supplementary credit card in my name. "Just to make payments easier, Dad. It's all temporary," I agreed. Foolishly, willingly, because fathers don't say no to hope, not when it looks them in the eye. The card arrived in a sleek black envelope. It had my name, but I never touched it. It went straight into Mariana's hands. She booked the hotel, the tickets, the excursions, even the spa days. "Everything's ready," she said 1 week before the trip. "We leave from Terminal 3, Sunday morning." I packed carefully. My best shirts, a pair of leather shoes I'd never worn, a winter coat I bought decades ago but never used, kept for something special. I even wrote a note to myself on the kitchen counter before leaving. "Don't forget, this is a gift, not a return." The airport was buzzing when we arrived. The boys were laughing, pulling little carry-ons behind them. Enrique was checking his watch. Mariana looked radiant. Not with joy, but with certainty. Like someone who had completed a task and was now simply waiting for the reward. They checked in swiftly. The airline attendant greeted them like regulars. I followed, a few steps behind, heart thumping like a young man's. Then, just before security, Mariana turned to me. "Pi," she said, "can you sit here for a second? Right there on that bench. We just need to fix something with the boarding passes." 2 minutes. I nodded. I sat. I watched them walk away, the three of them, their backs confident and quick. I waited. 2 minutes. 5. 17. 30-3. I stood, walked toward the counter. They were gone. The boarding announcement for their flight played over the loudspeaker, a soft chime followed by the gate number. My name wasn't called. I checked my phone. Nothing. No messages. No missed calls. Just a single notification from the bank. 8,346 reals debited. Hell de l'Orangerie, Paris. They had boarded. And I was still sitting. I didn't sleep the night before the flight. I thought it was excitement, a rare flicker of anticipation pulsing through a life that had, for many years, become far too quiet. But it wasn't that. Not really. It was a quiet hum in my bones, a kind of inner rustle I'd felt once before, when my wife left me and I didn't yet know she was never coming back. Still, I went along with everything. 2 days before we left for the airport, Mariana came to my place again. She was efficient, smiling. She brought a list of expenses already processed. "It's all done, Dad. All paid. Flights, the hotel, travel insurance. I used the card just like we agreed." She handed me a receipt folder for 188,312 reals. That was the exact amount charged so far. Everything top tier. Business class seats, a hotel with spa suites for each of them, guided tours in French and English, limousine transfers, dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants. There were even bookings for a Christmas boat cruise down the Seine. My name was on all invoices, as the payer, not the guest. "You'll be reimbursed if we cancel anything," Mariana said cheerfully, brushing aside any concern. "They're all refundable bookings." But I wasn't concerned about cancellations. I was focused on her tone, too smooth, too practiced. She sounded like someone rehearsing affection, not feeling it. "Are we really doing all this just for 5 days?" I asked. 5 days in Paris, with your grandsons. That's priceless, Dad." She kissed my cheek and left. Later that evening, I sat in my armchair and pulled out the old notebook where I tracked every major expense since 1992. I wrote one more entry, careful and neat. 12/12. Transfer completed to daughter's card. Our $500,000 total authorized. Not a loan, a gift. I underlined that last part twice. Not a loan, a gift. Because deep down, I knew if I wrote loan, I'd expect it back. And expectations are dangerous things in families where love is conditional. The next morning, I rolled my small suitcase to the door. I packed carefully 3 pressed shirts, 1 dark suit, warm socks, a scarf I hadn't worn in years, and a watch that no longer told perfect time, but still ticked. I even packed a disposable camera. Something about it felt nostalgic, like I was preparing for a trip that might exist only in memory, not reality. At 8 a.m., they arrived to pick me up. Mariana barely greeted me. Enrique stayed outside with the engine running. The boys were glued to their phones in the back seat. I climbed in slowly and watched the city roll past in silence, the skyline blurring into itself. At the airport, everything moved quickly. Mariana took my passport and boarding pass from me before I even had the chance to look at them. "I'll handle check-in," she said. "You just relax." She did all the talking at the counter, smiled at the attendant, even joked about traveling with her sweet old dad. I stood behind her, nodding when asked, signing where needed. Then, right before the final security gate, she turned and said, "Dad, can you sit over there for just a second? We need to fix a small name mismatch on the boys' boarding passes." I sat down, not trusting. I watched the 3 of them walk away, and then I waited. and waited. After nearly an hour, I checked my phone. No new calls. I opened my banking app. The account was active, but the most recent transaction caught my eye. 8,346 reals. Hell deal arrangery pre-check-in meal and deposit. The hotel name again. The one Mariana had chosen. The same one listed in the receipt folder. A sinking weight spread through my chest. I scrolled further back. Transactions had begun 3 weeks earlier. Little by little at first. Then, in the last 5 days, large amounts for plane tickets, excursions, dinners booked in advance, luxury items. I thought everything was paid in one go, but it hadn't been. They had been using the card for weeks before they even told me about the trip. There was no seat under my name on that plane, no hotel reservation for me, no car with my initials on the sign at the airport in Paris. I was a benefactor, nothing more. I sat still in that terminal, letting the reality stretch slowly across my mind like wet cloth pulled over a fire. They had made me believe this was about family, about Christmas, about reunion. But what they wanted wasn't me. It was access. By midday, I was still sitting there, silent and unmoving, among strangers with luggage tags and passports, while the speakers overhead announced delayed flights and final boarding calls. No one came back. Eventually, a young airport worker approached me and asked if I was okay. I nodded. He handed me a small paper cup of water and looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. He walked away. I took a long breath. Then I opened my banking app again, and my fingers began to move. I remember the moment perfectly, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was casual, quick, clean, like someone closing a book halfway through and deciding never to finish it again. They were walking toward gate 34, where the final boarding call was being announced for flight 187 to Charles de Gaulle. Mariana turned back once, halfway through the terminal. She waved, a tight, two-finger wave, almost out of obligation, the kind you give someone watching from the shore as you board a boat that won't return. "Be right back, Dad," she had said minutes before that. Just a quick fix with the gate agents. They messed up Enrique's surname. I nodded and sat down on the bench. I looked around. The terminal was buzzing. People dragging suitcases. Children clinging to parents. Announcements echoing across the hall. I held my coat on my lap. My ticket in my hand. My boarding pass. The one Mariana had never given back to me. At first, I wasn't worried. At second, I was unsure. At third, maybe 40 minutes in, I was cold inside. I walked up to the airline counter myself. I told the attendant my name. Her eyes darted across the screen. Then she gave me a look. I'll never forget, the kind of look reserved for people about to hear something that'll rearrange their insides. "I'm sorry, sir, but you're not listed on this flight." I blinked. I was. My daughter said she checked me in earlier. The woman frowned slightly. "There are 3 passengers with that last name, but none match your first." I stood there in silence. The world around me didn't stop, but my mind did. I opened my phone and called Mariana. The call went straight to voicemail. I called Enrique. Same thing. I messaged them both, nothing. Minutes later, I received a single text from Mariana. Short, almost kind. "Dad, I'll explain everything soon. Please go home and rest. We love you." This was necessary. That word did something to me. It wasn't anger yet. It wasn't sadness either. It was disorientation. Like stepping off a train only to realize the platform beneath you isn't solid. I sat back down and watched through the tall glass windows as a plane taxied onto the runway. Gate 34, flight 187. It lifted into the sky, clean and detached. Just like the lie I believed. They were gone. With my money, with my trust, with everything I thought we were rebuilding. I stared out the window for a long time. I thought about the Christmases when Mariana was small and used to make gingerbread cookies with me, icing each one with shaky hands. I thought about the time she fell off her bike and I carried her bleeding all the way to the emergency room. I thought about the birthday card I still kept in a drawer, the one where she wrote "You my hero, Dad" in blue marker. Maybe I should have thrown it away years ago, but I didn't, because I wanted to believe that people don't just change. That time doesn't erode blood. That love once given is always somewhere, hidden under pride or fear or distance. But there I was, luggage at my feet, my coat in my lap, and the ticket to Paris that never existed in my name. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours maybe. Long enough that the people at the gate changed shifts. Long enough that someone offered me a coffee. I declined. My mouth was dry. My hands were cold. Then, sometime past sunset, a janitor sweeping under the bench stopped and looked at me. "You waiting on someone, sir?" he asked gently. "No," I replied. "They already left." He didn't press, just nodded and kept sweeping. I pulled out my phone again, opened the bank app, and there, in clear, unashamed lettering, was the latest charge, 14,722 reals. Hotel upgrade, Paris. They were celebrating, while I sat in the fluorescent purgatory of a terminal, forgotten. It wasn't rage that filled me. It wasn't vengeance either. It was a slow, awakening clarity, the kind that burns more than it breaks. I clicked the transfer button. My fingers didn't hesitate. The money was still there, still mine, still under my control. And just like that, 500,000 reals moved from the joint account to my private reserve. Secure. Silent. Final. I clicked another button. Report card lost or stolen. I wrote, "Unusual activity. Potential misuse. Please freeze and reissue." A notification popped up seconds later. Primary card ending in 73XX. Locked. That was the one Mariana held. The one she swiped so easily in my name. I sat back, not with satisfaction, but with a kind of exhausted dignity. Because if they thought they left me behind, they had no idea who I still was. There's a particular kind of silence that descends on an airport after the rush fades. When the final boarding call fades into nothing and the screens switch from international cities to cleaning schedules and gate closures, I remained seated as the benches around me slowly emptied, not out of indecision, but because I couldn't yet convince my legs that it was over. I wasn't waiting anymore. I knew they wouldn't come back. I knew, deep in the tissue and bone of my chest, that they had boarded the plane without me, not by accident, but by design. Still, my body resisted the motion of standing. Maybe because standing would mean accepting that everything had shifted, and the world I knew, or thought I knew, was no longer aligned with my memory of it. Eventually, a security guard approached and asked if I needed anything. I simply shook my head. He left a bottle of water on the armrest beside me, more pity than protocol, and walked on. I didn't drink it. My stomach was folded in on itself, and my hands still trembled slightly, though not from cold. What disturbed me more than anything wasn't the betrayal, but the familiarity of it. It wasn't the first time I had been pushed to the margins of my own family, just the first time they had done it so publicly, with tickets and timetables and gate numbers as witnesses. Around midnight, a cleaning lady began sweeping under the rows of chairs. Her movements were slow, methodical, like someone used to being invisible. As she passed in front of me, I noticed a crumpled piece of paper near one of the empty seats across from where I sat. She picked it up, flattened it gently against her palm, glanced at it, and for reasons I can't explain, paused. Then she looked at me, blinked as if remembering something, and silently handed me the note before continuing with her broom. It was written on a napkin, not the kind from a restaurant, but a cheap, generic one that came with airport coffee, the ink slightly smudged. the edges torn. 3 words were scribbled in a familiar, shaky hand. "Sorry, Dad." And that was all. No explanation, no defense, no remorse thick enough to redeem the act. Just a paper-thin apology left behind like a receipt for what had been taken. I folded it twice and placed it in my coat pocket. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't know what else to do. It felt wrong to throw it away, wrong to pretend it hadn't pierced something in me that I didn't yet have the language to name. Outside, the rain had started, light, but persistent, the kind that streaks airport windows and turns reflections into ghosts. I sat there long enough to hear the shift change again. New voices echoed from the loudspeakers. New names appeared on the screens. The world kept turning. Flights kept arriving. And no one noticed the old man sitting still with a napkin in his coat in 500,000 Reyes no longer where his daughter thought it was. Eventually, I stood. My legs were stiff, my back sore. But I didn't rush. I walked through the empty corridors of Guarulhos, like a man drifting through the architecture of a memory. Every sign in that terminal was a monument to what had just happened. The restaurants they had walked past without me, the escalators they'd taken while I waited, the glass gates they passed through as I was left behind. I hailed a cab and sat in silence, turned right back. The driver didn't speak, and I didn't offer any reason to. My mind was replaying every moment of the past month, the planning, the calls, the folders, the brochures, the voice of my daughter calling it our last Christmas together. What a phrase. What a beautiful, hollow phrase. Back home, I entered a house that now felt like a museum. Everything was where I'd left it. The teacup in the sink, the slippers by the couch, the sweater folded over the armchair. Nothing had changed, except me. I was no longer the same man who had left that morning with luggage and hope. I was someone else now, not necessarily stronger, just clearer, not hardened but sharpened. I opened my desk drawer and retrieved a small black notebook I hadn't used in years. It was from the time I handled petty cash for the factory where I worked in my 30s, an old habit of recording things by hand, not just for accountability, but for clarity. On the first blank page, I wrote, "Transferred, 500,000 reals reason, integrity then." On the next page, "Left behind at gate. Note found, sorry, Dad recorded." Not forgotten that night. I didn't sleep, but it wasn't restlessness. It was preparation. I started thinking about what they would do next. How long it would take for them to realize the card didn't work. What hotel staff would say when the payment failed, whether they would call me again, and whether I would answer. I didn't know yet. I wasn't ready to decide, but I knew one thing with more certainty than I had known anything in years. This story wasn't over, and the next part wouldn't be told through brochures and promises. It would be told through actions, mine. Their mistake wasn't leaving me at the airport. The mistake was thinking I was passive. That behind my white beard, my hunched posture, and my calm voice, there was nothing left but resignation. The real mistake was forgetting the account was still in my name, that the card might be in her hands, but the control, the real control, remained with me, and always had. The next morning, after a sleepless night on the living room armchair, I opened my laptop with a simple, cold, almost ceremonial gesture. The sun had barely broken through the slits in the curtain, and the whole house still carried the muffled scent of abandonment. But inside me, there was no sorrow, only execution. I logged into the bank account by instinct, not by need. And there it was, the full transaction history, line by line, like a digital confession of what they had done. Lavish transactions over the past 72 hours. A 3,280 reals dinner with a view of the Eiffel Tower, children's clothing from a high-end boutique, a private pre-booked tour, and even tickets to a Christmas show. Each ticket more expensive than what I paid for Mariana's birth. All authorized, with my name printed at the top of the statement. I, the absent father, The inconvenient old man. The man left behind at gate 34 with an empty promise and a note scribbled on a napkin. Now, I was also the sponsor of a farce, or so they believed. That Saturday morning was the last time I left their access to the account untouched. There were still a little over 11,000 reals left on the credit card Mariana carried. A small amount, but enough for her to keep believing in the illusion for a few more hours. I kept the credit line active just long enough for them to check into the hotel in Paris, settle in comfortably, order room service, maybe snap a few smiling photos with champagne and a city view. I wanted them to feel at the top, because the fall, when it came, needed to be high enough to hurt. At exactly 1:42 p.m. Brasilia time, I contacted the bank manager through the formal channel. No email, no phone call. I used the internal message system, the same one I'd used for years while managing the inheritance my late wife had left. I wrote with surgical precision, like drafting a technical report, not a personal request. I requested the immediate blocking of the card linked to the joint account, citing unauthorized use by third parties following physical abandonment at the airport. I selected the option to dispute all future charges, requested a reissue of the card to be sent to my home address, and transferred the remaining funds for 197,060.24 reals to my personal reserve account, to which only I had access. Within 7 minutes, I received confirmation. The funds were secured. The card had been cancelled. The joint account was now dormant. Mariana, Enrique, and the kids were probably savoring croissants on that chilly Paris morning, maybe smiling for some photo, still believing the old man was home, silent and broken. But they had already passed the halfway mark of the credit line, and now every purchase attempt would serve as a reminder that silence does not mean absence, that those who watch from afar often see with greater clarity. I closed the laptop and returned to the armchair. There was no joy in it, only justice. It was no longer about the money. Had they asked honestly, I would have helped. Had they said they didn't want my company but needed financial support, I would have considered it. But the performance, the carefully choreographed abandonment, that was something else. That was betrayal. I spent the rest of the day with the curtains drawn, not because I wanted to hide, but because I didn't want the light to distract me from the truth. A truth now recorded in every bank statement, every receipt issued in my name without my presence, every click made on that card by someone who no longer called me father, only provider. By late afternoon, the phone rang. I recognized the number. Paris. I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up an old notebook and began writing down, line by line, everything that had happened since the day Mariana walked into my house. With that colorful travel brochure in hand, the story needed to be recorded. Not out of anger, but memory. Because when the storm started on the other side of the ocean, when the card was declined at the restaurant, at the hotel, at the boutique, I didn't want to forget what had brought me to that point. They didn't know it yet, but the game had turned, and for the first time in many years, I was in control. There's a peculiar stillness that exists between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. Not just silence, but an absence of motion, as if the very world has paused to let thoughts grow louder. That was the hour I moved the final amount, not out of rage, not even out of bitterness, but with the calm, mechanical focus of someone performing a necessary surgery. My home was dark, save for the dull glow of the screen. I had already changed the access credentials on all my financial platforms, locked the external cards, severed every connection that once linked my name to theirs. This was the last act, sealing the door behind them for good. I remember watching the progress bar as it completed the internal transfer for 197,060.24 reals disappearing from the shared account and reappearing in mine. It felt surgical but final. I closed the laptop and sat for a long while in the kitchen, listening to nothing. Not even the fridge hummed. I wasn't sad. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply alone with a truth that now had weight, shape, and consequence. What had once been a hypothetical betrayal, something I'd feared, denied, excused, had now crystallized into something irreversible. The silence in the house wasn't new. It had filled the rooms for years after my wife and I separated, and later after she passed. But this one was different. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of judgment, my own. Because for years I had told myself that Mariana's coldness was circumstantial, that her quick dismissals and performative kindness were a phase, that her eye rolls when I spoke and her habit of managing me like an elderly client rather than a father were symptoms of a generation gap. But now the evidence was mathematical, structured, legal. They had used my trust like a credit line, and now it was gone. I stood and walked slowly to the hallway. The house creaked the way old homes do, almost like it breathes differently at night. I passed the door to the guest room where Mariana used to sleep when she was a child. The small twin bed was still there, the quilt still folded neatly over it. The stuffed rabbit she once clutched to sleep remained on the shelf, faded from sun and time. I didn't enter. I simply looked through the crack in the door and realized that everything that had once lived there, laughter, warmth, stories, had long since vacated. Somewhere in Paris, my daughter, her husband, and their children were sleeping in a suite I paid for, unaware that dawn would arrive with complications. I pictured them briefly. Mariana with her hair wrapped in a towel after a hot bath, Henrique pouring another glass of wine, the boys playing with the tablet I had bought last Christmas, the illusion still intact, the belief that I was too slow, too old, too weak to interfere. They were probably congratulating themselves for their cleverness, for managing the old man, for packaging abandonment inside a note scribbled on a napkin. But they didn't know what had been set in motion. At 3:11 a.m., my phone lit up again. A WhatsApp message from Mariana. This time not a text but a voice note. I didn't open it. I deleted it without listening, then blocked the number. The symbolic final act. Not because I never wanted to hear her voice again, but because I no longer wanted to hear what she had to say when it came packaged in excuses, fabrications, or transactional affection. The only sound in the kitchen now was the ice slowly melting in the glass I had poured earlier, but never drank. I let it sit untouched, like the memory of the family I once thought I had. At 3:38 a.m., I received the first email from the hotel in Paris. It was an automated alert from the concierge system. Something about card declined, an alternate payment method required. I archived the message without responding. Another came 10 minutes later, this one marked as urgent. I ignored that one too. The collapse had begun quietly, like a storm rolling in behind curtains, and I had no intention of stopping it. I shut the laptop and returned to the living room. The lights remained off. I didn't want illumination. I wanted awareness. Not the fluorescent kind that fills a space, but the internal kind that pierces delusion. I sat in the armchair where I had once read stories to Mariana when she was sick with fever, and for a moment, I tried to remember the last time she had looked at me without calculation behind her eyes. I couldn't recall. At some point, we had both stopped speaking the same language. I had kept writing letters in the alphabet of sacrifice and memory, while she had learned to read only in terms of gain and utility. And somewhere in that gap, we had lost each other, maybe forever. By the time the birds began to stir outside, I had already taken a shower, made coffee, and dressed in clean clothes. Not because I had anywhere to go, but because I wanted the morning to see me intact. I was no longer the man left behind at an airport bench. I was something else now. Still wounded, but no longer open. Still weathered, but not erased. When the bank opened at 9 a.m., I called directly and confirmed everything in person. The freeze, the alert, the permanent closure of the shared account. I requested a printed ledger of all transactions over the last month, not for legal action, but for memory. I wanted to remember how they did it. Every step, every meal, every lie, because forgetting is mercy, and I was no longer in the business of offering that. They arrived at Charles de Gaulle with the casual exuberance of tourists drunk on control, still basking in the belief that their little theater had succeeded. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I could imagine it with haunting precision. Marietta pushing a trolley stacked with 4 designer suitcases, Henrique checking the phone compulsively, and the boys, likely overstimulated, bouncing between gates like fireworks with French candy in hand. They were proud of themselves. They thought the game had been won, that the old man had been shelved neatly back in his corner, harmless, confused, manageable. Their destination, one of those Parisian hotels whose name alone commands reverence, tucked into a historic street that leads to a manicured plaza, where doormen in tailored uniforms welcome guests not just with courtesy, but with measured awe. Marietta had chosen it carefully. I knew. She always had a taste for the symbolic. It wasn't just about luxury. It was about status. Proof. Proof that she had arrived, not just in a foreign city, but in life. That she, the once shy daughter of a working-class father, now moved in circles that shimmered under chandeliers and smelled of imported soaps. They must have stepped into the marble-floored lobby with wide eyes and heads held high. The clerk would have smiled, retrieving their reservation. I could picture her fingers on the keyboard, entering the surname, confirming the suite, a spacious corner room with a view of the Seine, booked for 5 nights under my name, not hers, mine. The clerk would then say, in well-practiced English, that they just needed the card to secure the incidental charges. That was when the foundation began to crack. Mariana handed over the card, the same card she had used for weeks, the one tied to the account she thought belonged to her as much as to me. The clerk swiped it. Declined. She likely smiled, assuming it was a mistake, a technical hiccup. It happens. Another attempt. Declined again. The smile tightened. Perhaps she asked Henrique to try. Maybe she requested they swipe it manually. Perhaps she blamed the international network, muttered something about Brazilian banks and poor connectivity. The clerk, still professional, would have offered alternatives. A second card, a deposit, proof of funds. But they had none, because everything else, all backups, all contingency plans, had been predicated on the assumption that the main card would always work, that I would remain dormant, that the money, like the old man, would sit quietly and allow itself to be spent. From the back office, the manager was likely called. She would have been polite but firm. Policies are policies. The reservation still stood, but they would need a valid payment method before handing over the key. Mariana may have fumbled for words. Henrique perhaps tried to play the arrogant tourist card, feigning outrage, invoking status, threatening to leave a poor review. But none of it mattered. In that moment, Paris was no longer romantic. It was real. And real cities don't run on intentions. They run on cards that work. At some point, Mariana must have pulled out her phone. She would have opened the bank app. She would have stared at the screen and seen, for the first time, the zero balance. The words, account disabled, contact administrator, and then the quiet, that moment when reality hits like cold water in the lungs. She may have shown Henrique, her fingers trembling, or maybe she kept it to herself, still hoping it was some technical issue, something that could be fixed with a call. I, of course, had already blocked their numbers. The email they sent went straight to spam. The voicemail left by Mariana, full of forced sweetness and subtle panic, was never heard. The hotel manager eventually asked them to step aside so the next guests in line could check in. That's what real consequences look like. Not cinematic. Not loud. Just slow erosion. A dignity stripped one policy at a time. I can only speculate how they spent that first night. Likely in the lobby cafe, pretending to be waiting for a manager. Maybe scrolling through solutions on their phones. Maybe contacting friends. Maybe blaming each other. Enrique accusing Mariana of not confirming the payment. Mariana blaming me, the senile father who probably forgot to authorize international purchases. But even in that misdirection, I knew they wouldn't fully believe I had done it on purpose. That was the beauty of it. I had taught Mariana that I was harmless, that I was generous to a fault, that my silence was weakness. That belief was the very tool they had used against me. And now, it had become the fog clouding their ability to understand what was truly happening. Back in my living room, I sat with a printed account statement spread across the table. Each line was a story. 3,280 reals for dinner at Les Ombres, or $1,900 at a luxury children's store, 2,400 reals on electronics, all in the past few days. They had been moving fast to fast, spending like people who thought the well would never dry. They were wrong. And the next morning, when they'd attempt to book another hotel or try to retrieve their luggage from storage, or buy something as simple as breakfast, they would learn, piece by piece, that the curtain had dropped, and this time, there would be no standing ovation. By noon the following day, my phone had accumulated 26 missed calls, all from Mariana. Most came in clusters, separated by minutes. I didn't need to hear the desperation in her voice to understand what was happening. The pattern was clear. There were also messages, a flood of them, each one shorter, more frantic, stripped of the polite polish she had once weaponized in place of sincerity. Dad, something's wrong with the card. Are you awake? We're in Paris. Please answer. Call me. Please. They came in like waves, each one cresting with more panic than the last. Enrique eventually joined in, though his messages were more accusatory. Are you playing some game? What the hell is going on with the bank? Fix this now. It was the first time in years he had messaged me directly. Even during Christmases, he would let Mariana handle the old man. And now, here he was, throwing empty commands across the ocean, believing that his irritation held authority. But that era was over. They were no longer speaking to the man they had choreographed into the background of their lives. They were speaking to someone they didn't understand anymore, someone they had misread for too long. The voicemails were worse. I never pressed play, but I saw the transcriptions. Mariana's voice, slowly unraveling. Her tone shifted from confusion to pleading to something that resembled guilt but didn't quite make it. I didn't need to listen. I knew those cadences too well. I had heard them years ago, when she was a child and wanted something she knew she hadn't earned. Only now, the stakes weren't a bicycle or concert ticket. They were her entire mask of success, her fabricated identity of independence, her illusion of being in control. I waited until the messages stopped, until silence returned. That's when I answered. I opened the messaging app, found the last unread bubble from Mariana, and typed for words, "Enjoy your trip, Mariana." No punctuation, no anger. No threat, just a sentence that said everything. And then I blocked the number. I made a coffee afterward, sat in the garden, and let the winter sun brush against my face. The warmth was shallow but real. It reminded me that I still existed outside their web, that my days, stripped of noise and false obligations, still had shape. I had no intention of retaliating further. There was nothing left to prove. I hadn't acted out of cruelty. I had acted out of clarity. When they left me at the airport with a promise and a lie, they forced a new lens onto my eyes, one that no longer filtered their actions through love but through fact. They were not victims of a technical failure. They were victims of their own entitlement. I spent that afternoon reviewing old photos, not with nostalgia but with a historian's eye, trying to understand where the fracture had begun. Mariana, as a child on my shoulders at the beach. Mariana at her graduation, hugging her mother but not looking at me. Mariana at our last Christmas together before the divorce. Eyes fixed on her phone while I handed her a carefully wrapped gift she never opened in front of me. There had been signs. I had ignored them. They would survive the night. They had options. Credit cards of their own. Friends they could reach out to. Maybe even the embassy. But what they wouldn't have, what I had taken back without raising my voice, was the safety net they assumed would always be there. The silent man with open pockets and a forgiving heart. That man was gone. Not because I'd become someone new, but because I'd finally stopped pretending. Mariana would now know what silence feels like when it isn't passive, when it's chosen. Later that evening, I received an email from the hotel concierge. Short, respectful, formal. It explained that the guests under my reservation had failed to provide alternate payment and had vacated the suite. Their belongings were being held until arrangements were made. The hotel apologized for any inconvenience and offered to close the account. I replied with 2 words, "Please proceed." That was all. Then I shut the laptop and turned off my phone. I made soup. I read a book. And when I went to bed that night, I slept without dreams, not because I had no regrets, but because for the first time in years, I had acted in alignment with what I saw instead of what I hoped. It was a cold Monday morning when the notification appeared at the top of my screen. Subtle, quiet, almost unimportant in appearance, but I knew what it meant before I even opened it. The subject line was short: emergency cash withdrawal attempt, flagged and denied. The location: Paris, France. The amount: €2,000. The attempt had been made at a bank just a few blocks from the luxury hotel they never got to sleep in. Likely at one of those sterile glass ATMs tucked into the wall, blinking coldly at the line of tourists trying to make sense of foreign prompts. I imagined Mariana standing there, her face pale not from the cold but from the realization that every door was shutting. Enrique probably stood beside her, whispering options with false confidence, still convinced that someone would fix this soon. But the ATM didn't care about panic. Machines don't negotiate. And that one responded in the only language it knew. Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution, of course. They tried again. Lower amount. Another card. Another machine. The result was the same. What they hadn't realized yet, or maybe had just begun to understand, was that I hadn't just canceled their card. I had blocked every path they could use to reach my money. The app was inaccessible. The accounts were sealed. The line they thought was a lifeline had turned into a wall. And this time, no performance, no voice message, no dramatic text could reach me. The bank's notification came with a courtesy follow-up call. A woman named Camila from the fraud prevention team asked if I was aware of the attempted transaction abroad. Yes, I said. Would you like us to continue denying all foreign attempts? Yes. Should we note this as suspected misuse? No need. I replied. This is exactly what I expected. She paused. Very well, sir. I thanked her and ended the call. That was it. That was the moment I knew Mariana had hit the ceiling. The plan had crumbled beyond repair. First came the surprise at the hotel, then the confusion, the calls, the messages. Then came silence, and now desperation. That attempt to get cash. It wasn't for shopping. It was survival. They had reached the limit of improvisation. The hotel had refused them. The restaurants required working cards. Even a simple taxi needed digital payment. They were in a foreign city, underdressed for winter, dragging 3 children with them, and now entirely cashless. And I had no intention of stepping in. I spent the rest of that morning in the garden. I had begun trimming the lemon tree that had long outgrown its shape. Funny how something left to grow without guidance becomes wild, unrecognizable. I suppose relationships work the same way. For years I had let Marietta prune me into what she needed. A provider, a listener, an obedient echo of her needs. I had played the role so well I almost forgot it was a costume. But that was over now. Around 2 p.m., I received a new email. This one was from the hotel concierge again, far more formal. They wrote to inform me that the guests associated with my reservation had vacated the premises without settling their expected expenses. They had left behind luggage that was now secured, pending resolution. The tone was courteous, but sharp, like they were bracing for legal entanglements. I replied with a single paragraph. The individuals in question were not authorized to use my financial credentials. Any items left behind may be considered abandoned. I hold no responsibility for their stay or their debts incurred. I didn't sign it Mr. or Father, just my full name, like any stranger would. Later that night, as the wind pushed against the windows, I thought about Mariana again. Where were they now? A cheap hostel? A friend's couch? The embassy line? I wondered how she explained it to her children. Did she lie? Did she say it was a mistake? A technical failure? Or did she, for the first time in her life, tell the truth? That she had lied. That she had betrayed someone who trusted her. That she had gambled with more than money. She had gambled with blood. The thought didn't bring satisfaction. Just silence. The same silence I had grown used to. Not absence, but certainty. The kind that settles over you like fresh snow. Soft, cold, undeniable. Before going to bed, I checked the bank app one last time. The money was safe. The logs were clean. The alert had been archived. And there, at the bottom of the page, a timestamp confirmed what I already knew. Withdrawal declined. Cardholder protection in effect. That's what I had become now. Not just a cardholder, but the protector. Not of them, but of myself. And that was enough. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the neighbor called me. He sounded hesitant, unsure if he was intruding. "Your daughter was here," he said. "They came back. A man with her. 3 kids. She looked different." I thanked him and hung up. That was enough. I didn't need the details. I could see it all in my mind with the clarity of someone who's rehearsed a scene 1,000 times. Marietta standing at the gate of my old house, the one with the peeling green paint and the garden she never cared to water. The one where she grew up, where birthdays were celebrated with cake and paper hats and dreams whispered in corners. No one listens to anymore. She was back, but the door wouldn't open because I wasn't there. They rang the bell, waited, knocked again. Eventually, the new tenant would have come out, a kind woman named Celia, recently widowed, whom I met through a friend from the Rotary. I had sold the house to her quietly, swiftly, with no signposts or farewells. It had been mine for over 4 decades, but not anymore. The paperwork was clean. The mailbox bore her surname now, and Mariana, standing on the porch she once stormed out of during adolescence, realized she had lost not only the key, but the history. I had moved out 3 weeks earlier, packed everything in silence, gave away what I didn't need, took only my books, my records, a few clothes, and the ceramic cup my late mother gave me on her last hospital visit. The rest, memories and dust, I left behind. I didn't even look back when the truck pulled away. Some departures are best done with the spine straight and the heart sealed. I now lived in a small, clean apartment in a building near the lake. It was quiet, high up, with large windows and no ghosts. I spent my mornings reading, my afternoons walking, and my evenings planning. Not revenge, but legacy. Because when someone tries to erase you, the most dignified answer isn't retaliation. It's reconstruction. The money, the 500,000 reals they tried to harvest from the skin of my trust, was gone too. Not wasted, just redirected, transferred across several accounts, shielded legally, and then donated in slices. A children's orchestra in the outskirts of Sao Paulo, a retirement home that never had heating in winter, a scholarship for a girl who reminded me of Mariana before she learned how to lie with her eyes. The last portion of the money was deposited into a fund with my name. Not for me, I had enough. It was for a boy named Davi, whose mother used to clean our house when Mariana was still in pigtails. Davi had gotten into medical school but didn't have enough for tuition. Now he does. That was my final act, because vengeance isn't always a blade. Sometimes it's just the redirection of the future, taking what was stolen emotionally and investing it in someone who would actually carry it with grace. When Mariana realized the house was no longer mine, she tried to reach me. She sent a letter, not handwritten, not tender, just a typed piece of paper, delivered by some courier, that said, "We need to talk. I think we all made mistakes. The kids miss you," but it was signed only with her initials. I didn't respond, because that sentence, "We all made mistakes," was the last curtain, the final dodge, a way of spreading guilt thinly, evenly, so no one has to hold it all. But I had held mine for decades, quietly, without asking for repayment. She would now learn what it means to carry hers. Weeks passed. No more letters. No more calls. The silence was complete now, not born of absence but choice. I sat in my new living room, looked out over the lake, and realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. That trip they planned, the last Christmas together, had, in a way, fulfilled its promise. It was our final holiday as a family, the end of an illusion, the unraveling of a rope frayed over years. They had taken a plane to Paris and returned to a world where my door was no longer open. And that, more than any declined card or missed message, was the true cost of what they did. And the truth is, some journeys don't take you to places. They take you away from people.